Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Exhibition Kitchen virtual with an amazing author. We're so excited to bring you, especially in our January month. I feel like nutrition is on everyone's mind, and our guest today is so well-versed and so wonderful, kind-hearted. I could go on and on, but let me give you a quick intro of her. So I've got Miss Carly Knowles. She's an MS, RDN, LD, lots of words after that, and which can tell you to trust her. She has always loved cooking, but it wasn't until she went to live in a rural village in Peru that she saw just how impactful food and nutrition can be. This profound moment set her on a path to become a registered dietitian nutritionist, which is the RDN, and food and nutrition expert. She earned her Master of Science degree in nutrition from Bastyr University and has experience working as a clinical dietitian in both inpatient and outpatient settings, as well as private practice. Carly now teaches cooking classes in the community and specializes in food nutrition, writing, recipe development, and nutrition consulting for healthy food and cookware brands. Her new book that has come out, The Nutritionist Kitchen, is an amazing book, pretty much I would say divided into two parts. One, letting everyone know about the principles of cooking, the finding balance in your food, living seasonally, and what that means for being at home in your kitchen. With many insights to stocking your kitchen and how to shop seasonally, this book is truly a treasure trove of information. I'm very excited. As we know, if you stay to the end, we're going to give away a few of wonderful Carly's books. But again, we'll come back to the end. I've been talking too long. I love it a lot, but I just want to introduce you to Carly Knowles, and thank you so much for being with us.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That was such a nice intro. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here today. This is so fun. I've admired Northeastern for a long time, so it's just a real pleasure to be here with you all. And I'm happy to report it's actually sunny here. I'm in Portland, Oregon. It was snowing this yesterday, and now it's sunny, which is just wonderful. So you actually can see me in this small little office I have. But yeah, that was a great intro. I'm going to run through about 10 minutes or so, a little more maybe of a PowerPoint presentation with a little more about me and my food philosophy, and some more info from my book, The Nutritionist Kitchen. So let's dive in. And thanks again for joining me. And then we're going to make two recipes out of the book with Tom, which I hear he's just this awesome resource for you guys. And I've met him virtually. He seems great. So let me click over to the PowerPoint and away we go. Okay, starting this. Okay, I believe you can see it now. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So Carly Knowles, registered dietitian nutritionist. So I earned my Master's of Science degree from Bastyr University, which is in Seattle, Washington. It's a fabulous program focused on natural medicine and the concept of food as medicine, which is actually kind of challenging to find in the dietetics nutrition world. So that was a really unique experience. I became a registered dietitian nutritionist after a year's worth of an internship, where I had to complete 1,000 hours. If any of you are dietetic students or already RDs, you know what that is all about. It's quite tedious. And then I became licensed in the state of Oregon and Washington. I call myself an ambassador of culinary medicine. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. And then recently I authored a new cookbook. I call it a nutrition guide and cookbook. It's the Nutritionist Kitchen. Like Erica said, it's part my nutrition philosophy and some ideas I have around healthy eating and food as medicine, and then over 60 seasonal recipes. And then recently, just for fun, I became a postpartum doula. I'm a mom of one 21-month-old son, little boy named August, and we're about to have a little girl in about 2.5 weeks. So life is fun and exciting, and I'm really enjoying working with new moms on nutrition, and then also using my doula services, which is really great. Looks like it went backwards. Okay, so for anyone that needs a little refresher on what a dietitian is or a dietitian nutritionist, we're nationally certified. We're considered nutrition experts. We have a minimum of a bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics. And as of 2024, will actually be required to have a master's degree to be considered a dietitian, and anyone else will be grandfathered in if they receive credentials before then. Like I said, we completed a supervised 1,000-hour practicum, passed a national board exam, and something unique about us is we're able to work with insurance companies to bill reimbursable hours for patients. And that's in a whole variety of settings: hospitals, clinics, private practice. I've worked in all of those. I've been a dietitian for coming on 8 years, and it wasn't straightforward for me. I've experimented in the field and really, took some time to figure out what it is that was calling to me. But I'm really happy I got that experience, and I would be happy to answer any questions for any students moving forward if they have about some of that and how it's informed my career. So I called myself an ambassador of culinary medicine. For anyone that doesn't know that term, culinary medicine, I encourage you to use that link on the bottom. If you can, I'll spend some time on this slide for a minute so you can copy it. It's a really, really cool emerging evidence-based field that blends the art of food and cooking with the science of medicine. So when you talk about that concept of food as medicine or food is medicine, this is really the scientific explanation of what that means. And in this article specifically, and then a lot of the authors involved are doing some really cool things in that field of culinary medicine. And once you start digging into this world, you'll see there's conferences and groups you can join. There's one great group called the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative. That's really incredible. They're doing some awesome work in this field. And it's just a really, really interesting place where we honor that art of food and cooking, because that's a big piece of how we then get that medicine, right? And I believe personally that they go together. And when we separate them is when we get into a little trouble. So for me, it's really exciting to see people publishing research around this. It's a belief that high quality foods prevent and treat disease. It's not a one diet fits all approach. People that practice this type of culinary medicine, we focus on the individuals, how food works in the body and in specifically that person's body. And then we take into account socioeconomic, cultural aspects, right? So how to individualize someone's care plan. And then, of course, not to be missed, the joy of eating and cooking. Excuse me. So that's really, that embodies the field of culinary medicine. So then my food philosophy, and I talk about this in the book, and it stems from that culinary medicine perspective. I break it down into these palatable little snippets, which I call the principles. And it's not meant to be like a rigorous, structured, set of rules. It's more just these guidelines that I've used with my own patients historically that I believe can be helpful for people to get started. I get asked constantly, what's the perfect diet? And I don't have one, and I don't believe one exists. Instead, what I say is that there's some ideas or some guidelines and some principles that we can bring to anyone's diet, anyone's lifestyle, considering the individual. And we can use these principles to guide us and help us. So I'll break each one down. But the first one that has to be discussed is choice and awareness. So working in private practice specifically, I found that you have to, when working one-on-one with a client or a patient, you really, and with yourself, honestly, you really have to make a choice and bring awareness to the idea and the concept that food can prevent disease, heal and restore the body, and maintain a long-term health and optimal function. If you can't, if that's not a choice you're making, if someone else is making it for you, or you're not convinced that that happens, then any concept of food as medicine or using your food in that way, in that powerful, impactful way, it's just not realistic. So I truly believe in order to transform your food into medicine, you first have to see your food as medicine. And sometimes it's a conscious choice. You really have to make that perspective shift. Sometimes with certain patients, I'll sign contracts with them that, you know, this is something they're going to work on. And it's really this conceptual tool that allows them to get their head in the game, and it's a choice they make, and it brings awareness to them specifically to their life, and it can be really helpful for certain people. And I asked the question, like, do you really believe that food can prevent disease and help you heal? Without that, I don't think anything else will work. Whole foods. So the other base, this other principle guide that I have is that we should structure our diets around whole foods. And then this still leaves room for everyone's tastes and, you know, taste profiles and access to certain foods. But the concept of whole foods, it's food that exists in nature. Naturally, it's called, you know, real food. You can picture it living and growing in its whole form before it makes its way to your plate. It can be both plant and animal based. And then not to disclude, you know, I don't want to exclude minimally processed foods. We're so afraid of that word processed, but to be specific, you know, when you pickle carrots, for example, or you grind, you know, almonds to make a nut butter, or you mill flour or bake something, that's still considered processed. And we use that still in the definition of whole foods. So it's a little looser. It doesn't have to just be like a raw plant or a raw animal, or, you know, very, very minimally cooked. We can do some things to it to make it taste good. And then organic foods. So another question I get asked all the time as a dietitian is, does organic really matter? And where, you know, it's so expensive is the next comment I usually get. Do I have to do it? And if I do I have to do it in every food group? And I could only answer some of these questions before I wrote my book. So I dove into the research and really looked at where we have research around organic foods improving nutrient content and decreasing toxic chemical exposure. And some areas of some food groups have a lot of information and research around it, and some don't. So I wrote about that in the book, and I recommend when we know enough, for example, dairy, meat, eggs, like we know a lot about the organic qualities of these foods and how they actually do improve nutrient content and have higher bioactive compounds and less chemicals. So that would be a food group, for example, that I highly recommend focusing on organic foods. But it's not necessary all the time. There are, you know, research is limited. For example, in nuts and seeds, there's not as much research around every nut and seed. So the ones that we do know, we'll talk about that, and I explain that in my book. And then the ones we don't, we, you know, say you can go either direction. It's up to you and what your budget allows as well, of course. And then I like to share tools, and I talk a lot about this in my book. The Environmental Working Group has a Dirty Dozen list and a Clean 15. If you don't know these lists, please look them up. There's an free app you can get. I believe it's free or minimal cost. And then you can also request to get a pocket guide, which fits in your pocket. It's like a little trifold pamphlet, but it's very small, and it lists annually. You want to make sure you update it annually, what the dirtiest food or the cleanest food is. And those words are kind of charged. What they mean specifically is that the ones that have been found to have the most toxic chemical exposure from pesticides, fertilizers, etc., and which ones have the least. And it changes every year, and it's based in research. So I really like that resource for anyone. Mostly produce. Excuse me, I'm very pregnant. I mentioned that, so I'm very winded from talking. So excuse me for trying to catch my breath. Okay, diverse nutrient profile. So another way to help us identify kind of these guides or principles around healthy eating or food as medicine is, you know, eating nutrient dense foods. Here's a picture of a broccoli salad I have in my cookbook with pickled cranberries and an herb yogurt dressing. It's really tasty if you like broccoli. There's blue cheese in it and almonds and cranberries, dried cranberries I've pickled in vinegar. That's quite tasty. But the concept is really that bite for bite, you're eating food that's more nutritious. So if you compare this to something, you know, that was not so diverse in nutrients and wasn't as colorful, you know, bite for bite, the broccoli salad is going to win. So nutrient-dense foods contains more beneficial vitamins and minerals, less or no saturated fat, added sugar, sodium, or refined starches. Another way you could say is whole foods. When you focus on whole foods, you're just inevitably also increasing the nutrient profile of your diet. And then unprocessed or minimally processed and unrefined. So we know a ton of research. We know a ton about limiting processed foods and how that improves health incomes, specifically for heart disease, diabetes, unintentional weight gain, inflammation, fatty liver disease, and high blood pressure. That's where most of our research is, but we know a lot of other things, and there's a lot of new research, emerging research that's showing us even more risk factors for more disease processes. So definitely stay abreast to that research. And then what I focus on in this category, I talk a lot in the book about labels, reading labels, checking your ingredient list. If you can, shoot for 10 or less ingredients. And if you love something, for example, that has more than that, is there an alternative option? Can you make that yourself? Or is there a new brand or a store that might carry a different version of that has less ingredients? And this is, almost the same thing I've been saying. We're just talking about simple quality food and ingredients. So I have a recipe in my cookbook for a whole chicken. And the recipe is so straightforward and so simple. You literally have a whole chicken, a high quality chicken. I talk about what to look for, and you salt and pepper it, and that's it. You don't put oil on it. You don't put butter on it. The chicken itself, when you're using that straightforward, honest food, you don't have to do a lot to it to make it taste good. And I think that's the key. You do have to do a lot to things that aren't, natural in its whole form to make it taste good. Or if you like yogurt, you use a low fat or a non-fat yogurt, you often have to add a bunch of sugar to it to make it taste good, for it to be palatable, to have the right mouth feel. So we're talking about just simple quality ingredients that stand for themselves. And then this is really fun. Seasonal food. So my cookbook's organized by the seasons, and I talk about where the research lies around that concept of seasonal foods. And nutrition specifically. And there's actually increased nutrition in some, not all, foods based on, eating it in season. And the reason we don't know more is just because the research is lacking. My intuition says if we were able to research more around this concept, we'd actually find that there are more subjects, more food groups that do benefit from seasonality as well. But broccoli is one really awesome vegetable that during its peak season in spring and then in fall again actually is shown to have more nutrition, more nutritive value. So that's pretty impressive. It supports our seasonal health needs. So this is where my intuitive medicine concept kind of comes in a little bit, but we do know some foods like citrus, for example, which are high in vitamin C, are more readily available in the winter time. And when do we need vitamin C more for our immune systems? In the winter time. So there, more research, we need more research around this to like scream this from a mountaintop, but it makes so much sense that nature is providing us with the foods we need during certain times of the year when maybe different health needs arise. And then no one can dispute this next one, that seasonal food has better flavor, texture, and color. And the best example of this is tomatoes, our tomatoes. Winter tomatoes, mealy and pale and flavorless. And then in the summer, your tomatoes are tri-colored, if not rainbow colored, and are so juicy and sweet and delicious. So food often will just be more ideal in season. And then minimum exposure to toxic chemicals. There's a lot of research around that. We don't need as much intervention to grow food in its natural climate, in its natural season. When we start growing tomatoes in the winter, we need to put them in greenhouses, and we need to add a bunch of fertilizers and do special things to them to make them grow better and grow faster. And then it has to be said, we support our local economy and our community And we even can save our own money when we buy foods in season, because there's more of them available. There's more small businesses and small farms in our areas that can grow and transport the short distance, transport that food to the community. So it does so much when we focus on seasonality. And then this is a bonus one I throw in. If you're lucky enough to own cookbooks, if you're lucky enough to even be considering what a whole food is, if you're lucky enough to be at a university studying, you know, undergrad or graduate, then you're likely someone who's privileged enough to consider buying food that gives back. So whenever possible, shop and buy products that make an impact locally and globally. The Fair Trade Certified is just one label that you can look at and think about, but it's certifications often that are giving back to the community that they're taking these resources from, like cacao, bananas. There's a handful of coffee, of foods specifically that tend to be really taxing on whatever local community is growing those products or is producing them and sending them. So it's, I think, an important piece of food is medicine. It isn't physiological necessarily, but it's talking about the physiological health of our global health. And I think it's something to consider if you have that luxury. I'm almost done here. I will say that to me, and I talk about this in the book, it's not just what you eat, but also how you eat. This is a really important concept, and one that I find myself talking about almost as much, if not even more, than those specifics we just touched on, the guides around the principles of healthy eating. It's how you eat. You know, you can have the greatest diet in the whole world, but if you are, not preparing it well, you're not being mindful, you're not sitting down and eating it, you're eating it in the car, you could still have just the craziest digestion or, health implications from that, because we know enough about these concepts right here that slowing down, being mindful, bringing joy to the table, to the plate, and then honoring your feelings without food. These are very loaded, very serious pieces of health and physiological health, emotional health, the whole picture. This is really what holistic nutrition is about. I offer my patients a 20-minute challenge. I ask most people how long it takes them to eat a meal. And I'd throw that question out to you guys right now too. How long did it take you to eat breakfast this morning? Did you eat breakfast this morning? And most people will say it takes a lot less than 20 minutes. In fact, I'll get people will start to sweat when they think about 20-minute meals. Like, oh my gosh, 20 minutes, who has time for that? And I challenge you, sometime in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, if you can, try eating your meal in 20 minutes at least, where you think about your bites, you think about your eating it. You're not just shoving it all in 2 minutes and then waiting that last bite 20 minutes later. Like, this is a nice progressive 20-minute meal, and see how you feel afterwards. Most people report that it actually improves digestion. And there's research behind this, that when we slow down, we tune into that, we let go of fight or flight mode, and we tune into our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us rest and digest. And I talk a lot about that in the book. Mindfulness is a really hot topic, but it's something that, has been arguably in the health world for a while. It's bringing mindfulness to your plate, mindfulness to cooking. It's a concept in culinary medicine that's discussed a lot. Without mindfulness, sometimes we can't tune into how we really feel about the food we're eating and what we're lacking or what we're wanting. And that piggybacks on joy. When we take joy out of eating and joy out of cooking and just joy away from food, it becomes an animal, and we're at war with it, and it becomes something really unfun and not on our side, not on our team, and it can really distract us and hurt us even long term, considering our health. So it's definitely something to work on if you can. And then honoring your feelings without food, that's really about that concept of intuitive eating, if you've heard that, IE as they call it, intuitive eating, we are emotional beings. We're emotional creatures, and food is emotional. That's not a problem. It's when we only use food to cope with our emotions where we can find ourselves spiraling and using food in a way that isn't productive for our health. So finding other ways to honor your feelings, not just with food, can be really important. And it's a big piece of what I do in my work as a dietitian. And this is it. So this is the book that, really encompasses all of that I just discussed. And I tried to make it. I was talking to Erica before you guys all jumped on, and it was just so wonderful to hear she agrees. It's a really approachable nutrition guide. Dietitians are kind of known as the food police, and I try really, really hard not to be that personality type and to stay open-minded and inclusive, because I think that's lacking in this world. So I tried really hard to make a book that was approachable, palatable. There's 65 nutrient-dense seasonal recipes for all diet types: vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, meat and seafood. There's an 8-step guide to using whole foods as medicine, which is what we went through, those guidelines. And then I talk about what a balanced plate might look like, how to find balance for you specifically as an individual. And then I go through each food group when I discuss the whole foods pantry, and I talk about my favorite items and my favorite ingredients in each food group and what to look for specifically, and then even how to prepare them and cook with them and store them. And then finally, I add in seasonal meal plans and ready to go shopping lists. For someone that doesn't know how to eat seasonally or where to begin, that's a really great place to start, is to try, for example, like right now, the 3-day winter meal plan. And it has this shopping list next to it with little check boxes. So you can really just almost take this book with you to the grocery store, make a copy, take a picture, and it's that simple and straightforward. So yeah, so that's the book. That's my philosophy. And I'm happy to jump right into the recipes, or we can ask questions, whatever Erica wants. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Chef Tom here. Hope everyone's having a good day. We're going to do a couple of recipes from Carly's book. We've got a,
1 second.
oh, sorry.
Can you guys, did I end it? Oh, there it is. Sorry. Stop share. There we go.
Okay. So yeah, welcome everyone. So we're going to do a couple of recipes out of Carly's book. So we have a flourless almond butter brownie that we're going to do. And we're going to do a lentil stew of sorts with coconut milk, and just a delicious recipe. So I think we're going to start with the almond, with the brownies. So while we get that together and we put it in the oven, we can then sort of go right into the soup. So what we're going to do first is we're going to mix together the almond butter. And Carly, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about why almond butter, or can use other nut butters?
Yeah, almond butter. So I have a recipe for how to make homemade nut butters in general, and I make an almond butter. So I thought it was nice to connect the two together. So you can make your own nut butter. Almond butter seems to be the popular one. I really like it because it's a little stiffer than even peanut butter or cashew butter, for example. So that's nice. It'll hold, the brownie will have a really nice dense shape, which I think's great. But you could really use any butter. I've used peanut butter before, and I've used cashew butter, and they all turn out pretty good.
Nice. So what I've done, I've added the almond butter, maple syrup, and some vanilla. We're also going to add a couple of eggs. And we're going to kind of whisk that around. On. We're going to take our dry ingredients. We're going to take our cocoa powder. We have some baking soda. and some salt. And then we're going to mix that around, make sure everything's incorporated nicely. I think we've got a good mix there. So then we're going to take and add our dry ingredients into the wet. And just again, make sure everything is incorporated nicely. Then we've got some chocolate chips, and we're just going to fold those in after we get a nice mix here. And I think we'll maybe do a little scrape down to the bowl. As anybody on the team here at Northeastern knows, I don't profess to be a baker or pastry or anything, so my methods might be a little. There we go. Right.
I'll say that. I'll jump in, Tom, and say,
sure, please.
This book is not just approachable, hopefully, for the nutrition information, but also the recipes. I don't find many recipes in here to be challenging. They're all good recipes for kind of that intro cook or experienced. I try to keep them minimally, with minimal ingredients as well. What I love about cooking these brownies or making them is you can't over mix them. You know how sometimes you can over mix baked items that have flour in it because of the gluten, creating larger gluten structures. So you could mix this for days and it's still going to turn out awesome. Great. So that's the good news.
Right up my alley. All right, so we just folded in our chocolate chips, and then we're going to prepare our dish here. So we've got some coconut oil. We're just going to, similar to butter in a way, we're just going to spread that around on the bottom, around the sides. We don't want this to stick in the pan. Okay. Then we are just going to put our batter into the dish and flatten it out. Oops, sorry. There we go. Yeah. You can see it's really a nice kind of stiff mixture. It seems to be very forgiving.
And you can add nuts and seeds to this recipe. You can add white chocolate chips, dark chocolate chips. You could keep the chocolate chips out if you prefer. Somehow it stays, because of all that healthy fat, even though it has this kind of stiff consistency, it stays really moist, and that, kind of chewy, soft brownie texture. It's yummy. I say all the time, like, I'm shocked that I made such an incredible recipe. It's so good. And I make it, and every time I pull it out of the oven, I'm like, wow, that happened again. Like, yay, it's quite tasty.
Yeah, so it's really pretty that easy, pretty much that easy. Then we're going to go into a 325 degree oven for about 35 to 40 minutes, I believe the recipe says. And that's it. And then while it bakes, the room's going to smell great. And now, while that's baking, we're going to move on to our next recipe, which is the red lentil stew. Yeah, so I'm going to I have some more coconut oil. Just going to render that down a little bit. And we've got, I've kind of pre-chopped my onions. Didn't think you guys wanted to see me have to chop onions. But one thing I would like to share, and again, anyone who knows me knows, has seen me do this before, I guess, but the recipe calls for garlic And I like to use a microplane. You can, work it with a knife and work it into a paste that way. But it's just so easy to keep, peeled cloves of garlic. You can even, peel them and freeze them and just take them out as you need them. And then we just grate them. I love the microplane because you can, again, use it for this. You can grate, zest, citrus zest of sorts. You can zest cheese and chocolate and all kinds of cool things with that. All right. So now we're gonna start by adding our onions. That's always a great sound. That's sizzling. And for me, again, I don't think this is part of the recipe. This is me not deviating a little bit, but I like to add just a little bit of salt in at the beginning to kind of help draw the moisture out of the vegetable. So in this case, the onions. So that's really what we're trying to do. It's really trying to extract or coax the flavor out. And when we make recipes, and Carly, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but we add to, we want to build our flavor. We're not adding all of our seasoning at the beginning. We're not adding it all at the end. We do it throughout the cooking process, kind of build the layers of flavor.
Yeah, Tom, I totally agree. And I love what your comment was on using salt to pull out the moisture. A lot of recipes will have the salt added at the very end. Right. And I think you miss an opportunity, as if you can season along the way, I think your food in the end will be more complex and have better depth of flavor. And then I love that idea of adding the layers. I try to do that in this recipe by slowly adding the spices and the salt.
Awesome. So we're going to add, so you saw that I threw in the garlic. I'm going to stir that around because, again, if you've done this before, you know that it can go from nice, flavorful, aromatic to burned and very quickly. So you have to pay attention to it. I think as Erica and Carrie can smell the nice garlic flavor.
Very good.
All right, so now we're gonna add our spices right now. So we've got a bunch of different stuff. So we've got some turmeric. We've got some cumin. We've got some cardamom. Got some cayenne and paprika. We've got a little bit of salt. I'm not going to add all this at once. The pepper. For me, I love black pepper. And a cinnamon stick. So we're just going to be able to see. Got some nice color going in there. Just want to toast our spices to kind of get the oils of the spices going a little bit. Okay. So a couple of other components. So the lentils we're using today for this recipe, so we've got some red lentils. So the ones that we're able to get are split red lentils. I don't know, Carly, if you have any thoughts on, if you're able to get them where you are, where they're sort of whole, but the ones that we're able to get here, they always usually come like this, where, they're split.
Yeah. So just for anyone that doesn't know the difference, a split red lentil is literally just that. It's a lentil that's been split in half. It's like saying oats, fresh out of the field, and then a rolled oat is just a slice of an oat. So it's the same idea. The difference is one will cook faster than the other. Because we're using a stew, because this is for a stew, it really doesn't matter as long as you have, the right mouthfeel, as long as the lentil is tender enough, then we're fine. So just keep, if you can only find split versus whole, and I agree, sometimes I can only get one or the other. I know stores like Whole Foods might have both choices, but a conventional grocery store will just typically have one or the other, and split is much easier to find. Just maybe adjust your cooking time, and I recommend you tasting it anyways for all the flavor, etc. So that's just, checking in with the texture then too.
Gotcha. So I'm going to add the lentils in just to give them let them absorb some of that flavor from the spices. Maybe give them a little toasting of sorts, if you will.
Yeah, Tom, will you speak to that a little bit? I think when I learned that toasting whole grains was an option, or lentils, it revolutionized my food. Will you tell people about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's it's really easy to do, and I think adds another layer of flavor to it. And again, it's just that you add them. So you could do it with rice. So same thing. If you were going to saute your onions to put in the rice or whatever, maybe you add your rice. Let that, you could brown it if you like. The rice kernels or not, but just to give them a little toast. And that's the same with all, a lot of grains. When we're making farro and doing things like that, we'll do the same thing.
Yeah, some of the more like bland grains, like barley doesn't have like a distinct flavor always. You can toast it and it just you can start to taste like the nuttiness of that whole grain, which is really great.
Yeah, brings out that whole different flavor. All right, so we've got different things we're going to add here. So we've got some coconut milk. We have some diced tomatoes. We'll add them all. And then we have some vegetable stock. Now, I am going to maybe not add all of it. We're going to see, again, because the lentils are pretty small, they're going to cook pretty quickly and open up. So we'll let that come to a nice simmer first. Yeah, and while that is coming to a simmer, there's another part of the recipe that we're going to top it with. So this is actually, so I've got some cilantro here, I've got some scallion, we have some lime juice, and we're going to add some a little bit of oil and salt and pepper. And we're going to just put it in the blender, pretty much as we, nothing really, no real secret to it, right? We're going to add a little citrus there, the lime. We're going to add some salt, and we're going to add some oil, for flavor, but also we want it to kind of help it go around a little bit. So we'll start with that. We don't want to make it too. All right, sorry about that. That's one of the hazards, I guess, of using a blender, right? All right.
You're making notes while you're blending your Lentils.
Say it again. Oh, so in making the topping here, so all we did was just throw everything in, as you saw. Just cilantro, scallions, a little citrus. In this case, it was lime juice, oil, salt, and I did add just a little bit of a touch of stock. I don't think the recipe calls for that, but just to, again, kind of help it go around a little bit, help it process.
And I love that.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Tom. I love that recommendation. Yeah, whatever, if you have a Cuisinart or any brand of a food processor with like a blade in it, that can work, or using a blender like Tom did works well. And then I love that you took it upon yourself to pour in a little bit of that stock to get it going. I think that's such a great piece of cooking, is to making it work for you, right? With whatever tools you have the point is in the end, you want something that's a little spoonable, like a little dollop of the chutney on top. So not to make it too liquid, but it looks great. Yep.
Great. Also scraping the bottom of the, when I toasted the herbs, I'm sorry, the spices and whatnot, we want to make sure that we're scraping all that goodness at the bottom of the pan. So I can feel with my spoon head that there's a little bit there. So we don't want that to burn, and we want to release that from the bottom of the pan to, give us that nice flavor. I think it's also important to taste during the process. Again, just kind of helps you see how things, the flavors are developing. And if you need to add, we always see in the cookbook, taste and adjust seasoning if needed, right? So, that's delicious. Wow. Very good.
Yeah,
and one of the spices, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This recipe has about a tablespoon of turmeric, ground turmeric in it, which is a lot for a recipe using turmeric ground, but I find that it's nice to highlight that flavor. We know a lot about turmeric for its health properties, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and on and on. There's ground black pepper in here that helps activate some of the key components in the turmeric, which we have research on, which is really cool. So always include black pepper with your turmeric. They're like ketchup and mustard, they go together. And then I just have to say this recipe is it's like a flavor bomb. It seems so simple,
Definitely.
but it's so flavorful. It really is. And it stains everything it touches because of that turmeric. So you've been warned. Wear an apron.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we could talk the rest of the day about this, but interesting at some of the markets. I mean, I know where I shop locally. I think because again, it's the pandemic, people are home, people are cooking. It was like the sourdough thing in the spring where some of the spices aren't as available as you would think. Like, oh, let me just go and pick up some turmeric or some cumin or whatever it might be, and they're out of stock. So kind of interesting.
So yeah, and spices can be expensive. If you've never tried turmeric, you might be hesitant to buy that $12 or $10 bottle of it. So the bulk section where they have, herbs and spices, it's a great place to try like a tablespoon, like only for this recipe, and see if you like it before committing to a whole container. Turmeric can get a little expensive. There's a lot of different, it's a controversial spice that you need to, look at where you're sourcing it from. And if you get it from a reputable source, it can be pretty expensive. So think about that bulk section. Sorry to interrupt, Tom.
No, that's all right. So we're taking our through the magic of TV. We have some of the brownie that I made just a little bit earlier. Looks great, and so we're going to cut it up now and plate it while our stew is simmering. So in this case, I think I'm going to try and get 9 portions. And yeah, so plating is up to you. I mean, it could be individual, but here I think we're going to do, for me, I like the end pieces, but I think we'll do maybe 3 pieces or so. So there's that. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this. I took a little bit on my own, but I know you're talking about yogurt earlier. So I do have some non-fat Greek yogurt, to just a little dollop. You could put it on there. You could put it on the side.
Tom, I love it.
I think the recipe is certainly rich enough already, but for those who want a little something. And then I also did just a little bit of a little sugar, a little powdered sugar. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just more for color than anything else.
I love it. I love it. And you're touching on such an important part, like getting involved in your cooking, involved in your food, but your presentation as well. When we eat food that's beautiful, we enjoy it more. We'll slow down and
Yeah.
appreciate it more. It's a really great
Right.
tool.
Absolutely. So our lentils, because they're kind of small, they have already started to open up a little bit, and we'll plate that up.
And I'll speak to the nutrition about these recipes briefly. The longer you cook the lentils, the thicker the stew will become. So that's just something to think about too. It starts to soak in more of the moisture, more of the liquid. But I really like making this recipe for new mamas. It's full of iron and folate. Just something kind of cool to share. 1 cup of lentils, cooked lentils, is 37% of your daily intake for iron. And 90% of your daily intake for folate. So for women of childbearing years, like those are 2 really important nutrients. So the stew is perfect for a new mom or a pregnant mama. And then the brownies, what's so fun is they're predominantly healthy fat and protein. So each brownie has about 6 to 7 grams of protein in it. So you can feel really great about eating those brownies.
So we did have a few questions come in throughout, and one was about the different oils, like for cooking, baking, and salad dressings. What are the health differences and how do they impact flavor?
Oh my gosh, this is a long conversation for sure, because if you just even focus on flavor and texture, as Tom can speak to this too, different oils will impart different flavors, or you can find a neutral oil, like a canola oil, for example, that doesn't have a lot of flavor. It's, oils, it's a really controversial area of the food industry because oftentimes oils are highly processed foods. And so looking for words like cold pressed or unrefined is going to give you a more wholesome oil typically. They're also typically more expensive, and they also typically have more flavor. So if you want like a really, really, really neutral tasting oil that is not processed, something I recommend is butter, because that tends to not have a ton of
then we'll go to the next question.
a ton of flavor, or like an organic canola oil if you can. But you'll start doing some research around oils, and there's some pretty frustrating information around how we process it and all the extra things you're actually eating with that oil. A book I really like for talking about cooking, and then Tom, maybe you can add in too, is Salt Acid. Help me with the name of this book. It's Samin Nasrat. She just came out with a book basically that teaches you how to cook, and she talks a lot about fat and oil for different culinary purposes, and it's really helpful. I'll add the title to the chat box.
That's an awesome book.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think, part of there's a Netflix series. I think she's got a video on there, and it's awesome. And it's really, when you talk about citrus, I mean, it's really, as much as we talk about seasoning and adding salt and pepper, finishing it, for me, I always have a thing of lemon juice or some kind of citrus nearby, because I think that helps, brighten the flavor, kind of pull the dish together. So I'm always have citrus available. You can see how this is starting to thicken up, as you said, Carly, that as the lentils cook, the stew becomes a little thicker. And so now for plating, I think the recipe calls for some chopped spinach, but I've got some baby spinach here. So I didn't chop it, but I think it's very tender, very young. So I think we're just going to ladle the hot stew over that and let the heat from the stew kind of wilt, the spinach. Oh, that's right. Yep. Got it. We'll do one more. There's 3 of us here, so only, I guess, 2 of us get to eat. I don't know. I'll have to find another. All right. So now we're going to take a little bit of the chutney that we made. It is nice and thick, very, as Carly said, very kind of spoonable. Maybe we just kind of abstractly, kind of put that around.
And I highly recommend making like triple batch of this because it's so flavorful. You'll put it on everything, toast, noodles, everything. It's vegetables, like roasted vegetables tossed in this. It's so delicious.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that's it.
Next question. Muted.
So something came in about soy and almond milk and vegan living and finding some resources for that, which we know part of that is your book. And you also mentioned that you could give some more information about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. First of all, Tom, that looks amazing. Both of those look so good. They turned out really well. Thank you. He made them very beautiful. Okay, yeah, soy food.
Thank you for the great recipe.
Yeah, thanks. Soy is a really controversial subject in nutrition and health. I would say as a whole, as a majority, people are afraid of soy, especially in the US. Americans don't eat a lot of whole food soy. So that would be tempeh, miso. That's something that is more readily available and culturally included in other countries around the world. But for whatever reason, Americans have this very strong belief that soy is bad and that it will cause cancer in women specifically. And also for men that eat soy, I hear all the time that they believe that they will become more feminine or that they'll lose testosterone. So it's one of my favorite myths to bust. Soy has a lot of really positive research around it. And a large breadth of research too. Soy has been studied in really large population groups, men, women of all ages, all disease, lifestyle states, etc. We know that it actually does not cause cancer, it does not increase thyroid, and it does not cause men to lower their testosterone. You can read more in details and look at some of the research in my book. But I highly recommend eating whole soy foods whenever possible. And there's some recipes in my book for tempeh. There's tofu recipes as well, edamame, and then soy milk that's been minimally processed is a really great whole food, minimally processed form of soy. There's a brand I like. I'm not sponsored or anything by them. It's West Soy. It's literally 2 ingredients, organic soybeans and water, blended and filtered. So check into that. But yeah, if you can, don't be afraid of soy. I highly recommend organic when possible. This is an area that we know a lot about soy production and how we treat and process soy in the US. And without that organic label, we can find ourselves in some funny situations with soy. So I'll just leave it there for time's sake. Are there other questions?
Oh, Carly, we are unfortunately out of time, which is so the best and worst thing that we know that we've definitely used up all this time. We want to thank everyone for coming to this wonderful event. I love that the questions are all here. I got to hear a lot of information at the beginning. I was very excited about that. So just thank you again so much for giving us your information, your recipes. And again, this book, The Nutritionist Kitchen, is available for purchase at the Northeastern Bookstore as of next week. We do have your emails and we'll be reaching out to the people who won the books to coordinate picking up. We are not delivering or sending it out at this time. It would need to come into the dining office on St. Stephen Street to pick up. And again, follow us for more things. Stay tuned to Foodie Friends as they come into your inbox, and please follow us at nudining.com and at nudining on Instagram. And if you and Carly is also tagged in a bunch of our things on that as well, if you're looking to follow her more personally. So we want to thank you all again for coming. And Carly, thank you so much for all the information. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Tom. I really had fun. Thank you, Erica. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.